Hellblade didn't exactly come out of nowhere, but it had a very humble release. Initially self-published and digital only, with a limited marketing campaign and a very tight budget, Hellblade is a work of passion that made a bit of splash upon release. It easily stood out for the subject of mental illness that lies at the core of its narrative, but even if you put that aside, this game easily stands on its own. But, like so many other great games out there, it failed to truly conquer the spotlight it deserved, and is, today, barely spoken of. In our culture, it is quite common to forget history, to leave it in the past, but having only recently risen to prominence as a cultural phenomenon and an economic behemoth, gaming, in particular, seems more vulnerable to this practice than other art forms. Last year's greatest classic no longer matters. We have this year's big releases always just around the corner, and we all, collectively, simply forget. But we shouldn't. We shouldn't forget, or fail to appreciate the great contributions of the past and, more importantly, to learn from them. So, let's see what lessons Hellblade has to offer, to both gamers and the gaming industry alike. I'm Bob the Hollow, and this is Surviving Senua's Sacrifice. As I said, the greatest hook of this game is in how it chose to portray mental illness, but I think it has much more to offer, so we'll be taking a look at its design instead. Hellblade is, in a single word, elegant. It is simple, efficient, and satisfying, where most games showcase a complete disconnect between gameplay and narrative. Every single element of Hellblade's design serves to further the story and to build the world that exists inside Senua's head. From the lack of a HUD, prompts and in-game messages, save for one, which is notorious for also being a lie, to visual and auditory cues all being a part of Senua's psychosis. Even the soundtrack gives us reason to ponder. One could start wondering whether all of the songs are actually playing inside Senua's head, considering her condition and how much her gift of sight is contrasted by other characters constantly asking her if she can hear something in particular. In a couple of occasions, songs are even presented as something that is manifested in the world, and that the voices remark upon, namely when Hela opens the gate at the bridge and when Dylan's figure of light starts guiding Senua towards the tree. Why go on? When you give everything and face that which torments you, only to find that it is worse than you could have imagined. Why go on? Sometimes the answer lies in a memory, a feeling, a song. And that's actually a very important lesson about maximizing a game's potential as a medium for storytelling. Too many games remember to be a game when it comes to headshots, but forget to be a game when it comes to their narrative. Regardless of genre or the depth of their story, every single game would benefit from weaving said story into its game design and general gameplay mechanics. Looking from this perspective, cutscenes in Hellblade are also noteworthy. They don't rely solely on cutscenes for delivering their story, but they are prominently figured nonetheless. And they showcase the perfect example of how and why a game should be excused for taking control away from the player. The why is for delivering the kind of emotional content that couldn't be delivered any other way. There are better, more interesting alternatives than cutscenes for pretty much every other thing you might wish to showcase or convey in a game, but when it comes to deep, personal emotions, you can't do much better than cutscenes. And the how is with an outstanding graphical fidelity, unprecedented quality of facial capture in-game, and frightfully realistic interpretations. The two basic gameplay mechanics you find in this game are the combat and the puzzles. They may appear simplistic on the surface, but they're far from it. The people at Ninja Theory are veterans at crafting combat-heavy games, their skills perfected over the course of many years. Crafting complex, flashy combat is right up their alley, but this time around, they traded complexity for subtlety and flashy over-the-top for a more grounded aesthetics that allow them to better convey Senua's personality through combat animations. There's no denying that the result is a very polished product. Always responsive, it's exhilarating and oppressing in more claustrophobic environments. It instills the need to charge at your enemies head-on whenever they give you the space to do so. There are no skill trees or skill points or item upgrades, and in order to fight better, the game forces you to get better at it. You, the player, become a better fighter, and that makes it all the more satisfying whenever you overcome a particularly difficult battle. Hellblade's combat isn't designed to make you feel empowered, though. Hellblade's combat is designed to make you feel small. There are no uninterruptible finishing moves, extravagant combos, or ultimate abilities. There are only enemies that are much larger than you, that will overwhelm you if you let them. You must immerse yourself in the experience and be mindful of positioning at all times in order to survive. Hellblade's combat is a constant cycle of dread and relief. Hellblade's combat is a war in its own right.
Focus your inner eye, and you too will see what's hidden in plain sight.
Puzzles are the other side of the equation. Hellblade is not a puzzle game, and so they are never as challenging as the ones found in actual puzzle games. They are simple and intuitive, but they are presented in a very interesting way, and, to be honest, they are more like a real puzzle than the follow the glowing light mechanic that seems prevalent in AAA games. The basic mechanic is the same for most of the game: find the rune. The variation comes in traversing the terrain during these sections, going through portals that change the environment ever so slightly, alternating between realities that give access to different areas of the map, positioning scattered pieces of broken bridges, staircases and doors in order to make them whole again. There's not much technical praise to be given here, but we should take notice in how creative the game is in its delivery. You can't just walk from point A to point B and press the button when the message pops up. You have to actively look for the way forward. You have to actually contemplate the world around you. Puzzles in Hellblade are always mired in storytelling. At the very least, you always have the voices inside your head, building your perception of what it's like to be Senua, and changing your personal feelings towards those voices with every praise and insult that they throw at you. At most, you're treading through a recreation of a past trauma shaped like a burning world or the lair of the beast. They always revolve around shifting perspectives and provide a window into Senua's process of dealing with the world. Self-imposed barriers that impede her progress at every corner, her helplessness from seeing patterns all around her and from letting those patterns cloud her judgment. All the little things we do mechanically are complex tasks for Senua, puzzles to be unlocked, compulsions to be satiated.
Looking back, I was so naive to think she could banish it on her own. The further she saw into the darkness, the more she struggled to see anything at all. And the gloom, the smallest hints of shape, sound, or thought, grew in strength until they consumed her whole.
the lesson at the end of this chapter? Well, there are many actually. Hellblade is a lesson for indie developers, showing that lower budget games can still have the polish and tight gameplay of AAA titles. It's a lesson for the AAA industry, showing that with their huge budgets and staffs, with all the many resources they have available to them, that they really have no excuses for delivering half-baked, uncreative and unfinished products anymore, and that we just might start taking notice of it. It's a lesson for AAA developers that there is life after EA, and yes, BioWare, I'm talking to you. It's a lesson for us, players, as well, that if you're feeling bogged down by the copy-paste, annualized state of the AAA industry, there are better alternatives out there. That you could be dumping money on people who actually deserve it, and that you could actually get your money's worth for a change. And finally, it's a lesson for everyone that video games can be both deep and meaningful while remaining fun and entertaining, that they can be visually exciting and filled with cutscenes while at the same time exploring new and creative ways of storytelling that will only serve to strengthen our medium, that they can tackle really relevant and sensitive issues while still letting you swing swords at Nordic fire deities for fun. The story of this game is where Hellblade's ingenuity really shines. Not so much with the plot itself, but rather with the structure around which the plot is built upon. You see, despite being 8 to 10 hours long, there's only a handful of events that have taken place here. Using flashbacks and memory alteration through suggestions, Ninja Theory was able to make these few events blossom into a full-fledged story that spans through the duration of our entire playthrough, and even before that. Flashbacks are sometimes thought of as having a simple yet strong recollection of a past event, but the clinical differentiation would be in how vivid this recollection is, allowing the person having the flashback to feel as though they were reliving that event, and in being often accompanied by an inability to perceive the flashback as an actual memory, leaving that person under the impression of being going through that event in the present moment instead. And memory alteration through suggestions is as straightforward as it sounds. Our memories are a lot more fickle than we would like to admit, and simple suggestions have the power to alter how we perceive the memories we reenact in our minds. Especially when these suggestions are consistently fed to the subject, to the point where a person can actually create entirely new memories based on suggestions alone, which has been documented to happen with a certain frequency regarding childhood memories and what are considered to be certain psychiatric malpractices. When it comes to Hellblade, Ninja Theory was able to combine these two with xenopsychosis to create a very interesting system, where memories feed themselves from other memories to create an endless variety of different worlds. It goes somewhat like this. Senua will go through an event in her life. She will later have a flashback of it and will be unable to distinguish it as being a memory, feeling as though she is living that experience in the present, but the flashback itself will be filtered through her psychosis, drastically altering how she remembers that event, which will, in turn, create an entirely new memory of an entirely new event that is only happening inside her head, and that will later be seen as an actual memory instead of a flashback. The whole process will be repeated later, and she'll have a flashback of the altered version of her original memory. The new flashback will also be filtered through her psychosis, and it will create yet another new memory of yet another new event. Words built upon words, built upon words. So, before we break down in-game examples of this system being put to practice, we have to establish the timeline of the new flashbacks she's reliving as new events. We are experiencing the flow of time going forward, but the flashbacks are being presented backward. The flashbacks we experience first are the last on the line of iterations among the many different versions of memories she has created over the years. Two cases that easily demonstrate this point are the tree of the Trials of Odin, which is directly taken from her memory of the tree where she met Dylan, and the fact that the very last playable event of the game, the fight against Hela, is the moment when she confronts her original memories. This will become more clear as we break down those in-game examples I spoke of. Hopefully. One of Senua's earliest memories is from her mother, Galina, being burned at the pyre by the druid Zimbel, who is also Senua's father. Zimbel sentenced her to this fate due to the voices she could hear, much like Senua herself. Galina believed the voices were from the souls of the underworld, and that she was their healer. Zimbel believed the voices were a form of darkness, and that listening to them was a way of defying the gods. From this event, Senua develops a relationship with the fire that is almost as strong as her relationship with the darkness, and it will come up in the narrative time and time again. It becomes hell itself, filled with burning corpses and her mother, still burning, paying for her own sins. Later, during the Trials of Odin, she's supposed to be remembering past events, and in one of the trials, she'll apparently remember being chased by a mob bearing fire towards her. At this point, Senua has already forgotten about how her mother died, and the memory becomes of her, who also shares the same gift, being chased by a mob similar to the one responsible for Galina's death, which is triggered by the accusation that she'd be responsible for the plague that blights Dylan's tribe. And the last iteration comes when she envisions the people who were burned by Surt, the mob now sacrificed like Galina was. A change that happens due to Druf's influence and the change on her perspective towards her mother. Another example of memories taking different forms at different times concerns the hole she was kept in by her father. In an earlier area of the Lair of the Beast, a vision of Galina speaks about the faces, about how they claw through the walls. Later, the voice speaks of the faces again, about how Senua could see them in the darkness of the room she was locked in, and how the lair reminds her of that room. And after she goes deeper into the lair, we can see the hands clawing through the walls. The lair is obviously a representation of that room, but she also remembers the hole her father kept her in. The memory is triggered by the beast itself, who is bringing back memories of the darkness. In that memory, inside that hole, she speaks of her mother, of the darkness growing in her, of fighting for Dylan.
The light's gone out. Run!
She's delving deeper into a hole of darkness while remembering the darkness that assailed her inside a hole. The Lair of the Beast is the hole her father kept her in, only she would later remember the hole as a dark room instead. That dark pit appears again in Hell, where she can see all the faces and hands coming through the walls again. That isn't a representation of the hole itself, but of how she felt inside of it. Being inside the hole was like going through hell. And she was kept there as part of Zynbel's rituals to purge the darkness. During this process, Zynbel would constantly talk about her mother. "This is what happens if you reach for the underworld," he said. If you put Zynbel's words about Galina, Senua's own words about her mother during her memory of being inside that hole, and how Galina herself is represented throughout the game, you can also see Senua's shifting perspective of her mother. At first, she's burning, still looking out for her. "Turn away," she says. "Don't look at me like this." And it's all her father's fault. But through Zynbel's reinforcement, she comes to believe that her mother killed herself, and, alone with her thoughts inside that hole, she thinks of her mother again. "Why did you leave me?" Her perception has shifted. She blames her mother for leaving her alone in the dark, alone with the darkness. We can see this in how Galina is presented inside the lair, as a frantic illusion leading her astray, and in Hell, where Zynbel speaks of how Galina burns to pay for her actions. But then, after she escapes his grasp, she starts to picture her as a compassionate, wise woman comforting her and giving her advice. Her face, once as clear as day, starts to fade away and becomes more blurred as time goes by, increasingly becoming less like a real person and more like a spiritual figure that is one with nature instead. Is that complicated enough yet? I hope not, because we're going to add a few more layers to it. Next, we'll be taking a look at the Trials of Odin. Senua's condition is a destructive force. It deconstructs her personality and undermines her ability to coexist with the rest of the world. But the Trials show something different. Something constructive. The objective of the Trials is to retrieve the sword Grammar, placed inside the Tree of Death. The tree itself is taken directly from Senua's memories, as shown in a flashback, and it stands for the tree where she met Dylan, a chance encounter that would eventually lead to one of the most defining moments in Senua's life, the Warrior Trials. Those trials were so crucial because succeeding in them and being recognized as a warrior shattered the illusion that her father and her psychosis had etched in her mind. The illusion that defined who she was regardless of whom she wanted to be. The illusion that crystallized a fate she had no hope of escaping. After the trials she had, at once, both the confidence to fight and the vision of a different Senua living a different life, a life worth fighting for. The road to the trials began with Dylan, serving as an inadvertent mentor of sword fighting, and then, later, with him serving as a mirror through which she could see herself under a different light. Dylan and the Warrior Trials would be forever linked inside Senua's mind, and it was to them that she would turn every time she needed strength. Not the strength to fight for the sake of fighting, but rather the strength to change. The strength to change oneself and one's life. Dylan became the guiding light, and the concept of the trials became the rite of passage through which she could be reborn. she creates new trials, new tests, in order to change. Surviving the wilds was a trial, retrieving Dylan's soul is a trial, retrieving Dylan's light, embodied by grammar, is a trial. And yet another interesting aspect of the Trials of Odin is that they serve as a microcosm for the entirety of the quest we're playing through. The Trials of Odin make the sword whole again by reforging its shards, but the shards are memories. They force her to remember. The Trials of Odin make Senua whole again by reforging her mind. And that's what the main quest of the game is. It's Senua piecing together her fractured mind. She relieves all of these moments in order to find herself again, and when she does, she can complete the trial. She can leave herself behind and be reborn anew. I was actually very impressed by the ingenuity of Hellblade's story. It is, yet again, quite elegant. A great feat of writing that manages to build a complex narrative out of a simple plot, to incorporate its themes into the very fabric of its story, into the structure upon which both text and subtext are written. And it does so always taking into consideration the nature of its medium, always trying, to varying degrees of success, to explore how the audience will interact with the story. And the lesson here? I guess the lesson is, you can write a good story in a video game. This isn't the first example of good writing in video games, but it is a welcome and much needed reminder that there's more to good stories than fancy words and pretty graphics, that there's more to video games themselves. There exists an archetype called the Wise Old Man, a mentor and a storyteller who often offers stories and guidance. You may have seen him before: Merlin, Professor X, Gandalf, Druth. Psychology would later categorize this archetype within its pages with the title of Senex, and Druth is the Senex of this story. His stories guide her through her quest, and his words even seem to drown out the other voices inside her head, which may have been what initially drove her to accept the wisdom he offered. But Druth's guidance is literally pushing Senua into hell. In reference to the Vikings, the voice says he brought this new kind of darkness into her world. Druth is another face of the darkness in Senua's life. Not in her mind, but in her life. He was like her, and she accepted him as a mentor, but his words have no wisdom. His lessons wield nothing. Even Senua herself can recognize that at some level. On the way to Surt, Druth tells her to let her world collapse, to raise it to the ground so she can see the world anew. To which Senua only replies, "I see nothing now." It turns the Senex archetype on its head, and it's a piece of cautionary advice about following words that would seem like wisdom, but for the warning in my heart. And besides being a wise old fool, Druth is also something else. Druth is Valravan. Or, even better, Valravan is Druth. Druth the liar and Valravan the illusionist. They both act as guides. She met both in the wilds. Drew's feathered garb is reminiscent of Valravan's coating of black feathers, and the marking on his forehead is reminiscent of Valravan's rune. Senua's mind created this guise for him, but why? What is it hiding? The first thing to acknowledge is that Drew himself was not a hallucination, despite interacting with Dan through the mechanics of her psychosis. Senua's memories of Drew are actual memories of an actual human being. This is made implicit by how the developers chose to portray him on screen, with the use of live footage instead of CGI, just like Zynbel, Melinda and Dylan. And then there's her quote-unquote memory of Valravan feasting on her. To be completely honest, the first time I watched this scene, before I made the connection that Valravan and Drew were the same, it made me think that this was Senua distorting a memory of being raped. That this was her way of coping with it. And then, later, I made the connection and it really looks like he sexually abused her while she was in a catatonic state. The Senex is a wise old man, but the Senex Amans is an old man infatuated with a younger woman. Valravan isn't the master of illusions. Valravan is the illusion, hiding a predator under the guise of a wise old man. And I know all of these casts a really bad light on Drew, but before any judgment is passed upon him, we should take into consideration that he was enslaved and tortured, and that, just like Senua, he either had or developed a mental illness of his own. If we're to take any of it as metaphors with real-world equivalents, I wouldn't paint him simply as a villain. I'd paint him as a victim, driven to villainy. We would have to deal with it accordingly after the fact, but maybe things wouldn't have gotten that far if he hadn't been mistreated in the first place. It should serve as an argument that mental illness isn't something to be shunned, it's something to be helped. The world already has enough intolerance as it is. Let's not allow ourselves the indiscretion of adding to it. One of the most overt aspects of Senua's psychosis is her struggle with multiple sides of herself being manifested independently from each other. And it may not be as readily apparent, but it becomes clear as the game progresses that this characteristic bleeds into her perception of the other characters as well. Zynbel is the shadow, is the darkness, is the beast, is pushing her forward, is Drew, is us. Senua is Hela, is Galina, is Senua. Dylan is Baldur, is Grammar, is Light. Right at the beginning of the game, during the intro, we're shown to be a part of Senua's psyche, as the main narrating voice speaks to us as though we were inhabiting the same mind space. This notion is reinforced by camera placement, which is closer than usual to its focus character, in order to make events and environments seem more claustrophobic, but also to make us feel more intimate to Senua herself. Later, while apparently speaking to the darkness and offering herself in exchange for Dylan, she looks directly at us, and we are, then, thematically equated to the shadow, pushing her forward and making her fight. On the way to Valravan, the voice speaks of exile, about how it makes home seem like a strange land, and its people seem like strangers. And she goes on to remark that she was never home at all. Senua went on to live with Dylan and his clan, making her former kinsmen into foreigners, and, even before that, she was already estranged among them. At this point, I had noticed that the Vikings call out Senua's name during battles, and it made me consider a correlation between Senua blaming her father for keeping her apart from her lover, and the Northmen taking Dylan from her once again, this time for good. And all this combined made me contemplate two possibilities. Either Zynbel brought her former clan to Dylan's village and killed them all, hunting the curse and cleansing the plague, in which case she'd be projecting the Vikings onto her people in order to cope with their betrayal. Or she might be projecting the identity of people she knew onto her enemies, another side effect of the intricate way through which she perceives reality. I ultimately settled on the latter, given that I had no reason to doubt the Vikings' existence, especially once you factor in Druth into the equation. That created a subtle theme within the story, another brushstroke of ingenuity, and it would have been the end of it if it weren't for Druth's final revelation, in which he implies that Zynbel was the one who willingly led the Vikings to Dylan's village. That revelation may have seemed like a twist out of the blue, but it wasn't. It was the payoff of something that was set up through themes alone. Storytelling 101 with a dash of creativity. Well done, Hellblade. Well done. And so, here we are, at the end of our foray. Delving into the core of Hellblade was a journey unto itself, and important lessons have been learned. Lessons to players and developers alike, but if you leave this journey having learned just one thing, if there is but a single lesson that you can take with you, then it might as well be the most important lesson of them all. The most important lesson Hellblade has to offer is what is he doing? He can't talk about it. He said he wouldn't talk about it. What is he doing?
What are you doing? You can't turn back now.
Can you hear me? I know you're out there. Have you played this game? Did you survive Senua's sacrifice? Can you survive your own? There is much that I won't tell you. There is much that I can't. But I can tell you about this game, can't I? Hellblade is a story of struggle and perseverance, a social commentary, an exploration of psychosis, a helping hand. Hellblade is a survivor's account. It is not the heroic tale of the person that survives a great calamity. It's not a tale about surviving the evils of the world. Hellblade is no tale at all. Hellblade is surviving for the sake of being alive. Hellblade is surviving because you're tired of dying. Hellblade is surviving yourself, despite of yourself. Hellblade is no tale at all. I am Senua, and so are you. We are all together inside Senua's mind. If we are all together, why is it always lonely inside my head? There are many voices inside Senua's head, but we are no voice at all. We are the force that keeps her moving forward. We are the shadow that consumes her life. She needs us in order to stay alive. We are no voice at all. We do not know what it's like to be normal. Looking back now, maybe we never did. When you're lucky, you can fake your way into acting normal. Sometimes you're not lucky, so you shut yourself away. When you're lucky, the world is not a cacophony of blinding lights and deafening screams and grunts. You spend your days looking at a normal world, filled with normal things and normal people, but they're not really normal, are they? Normality can be an illusion too. No, they're not normal at all. When you're lucky, they look at you and all they see is normal. Even if you're not normal, normality isn't real. Normality isn't normal at all. Hellblade is the lonely non-tale of Senua, the doubly dead, in that she died while still alive. The lonely non-tale has only one character, Senua. There are no other characters beside the protagonist. Senua is the protagonist, and there is no one else. There are people who care about Senua, people who wish to help her, but they can't. They can't because they don't understand her. But don't be mad at them. How could they understand? If they don't understand Senua, and if Senua doesn't understand them, they might as well not be real, right? Everybody's either impossibly pure, impossible not to love, and impossible to reach, or the embodiment of evil, the torturer, the deceiver, the fiend, or even the Senex, the wisdom of the wise, the reason that unravels the madness and makes sense of that which we cannot understand. In this known tale, Senua fights, bleeds, cries, dies forever, lives again, and she sacrifices something. But what did she sacrifice? The sacrifice is not important, but Senua's fight is, indeed, very much important. Very much indeed.
Very much indeed.
You are Senua now. Your life is hard. Your life is suffering. Why do you fight so hard? Why do you keep moving forward? Okay, you can stop being Senua now. Senua fights for her life because this is the only life she has. Shit happens, you deal with it, and you move on. Okay, that's too simplistic. It's true though, but it doesn't apply to this particular instance. But it's true though, and you shouldn't let the exception dissuade you from that truth. Back to the exception, fighting is dealing with your problem, but when the problem is a part of you, you can't deal with it. So you have to choose. You can either die or you can live. If you choose to live, you have to fight for it. But you can't deal with the suffering because that particular suffering is a part of your life, so if you choose life, you'll have to fight forever. If you're listening to these words, you are indeed alive. You have already chosen. You have chosen to fight. So keep fighting until you die. There is a third choice. One can also choose not to die, but to stop fighting. In which case, the rot will take hold of you. Your body will remain alive. People will look at you and think, yes, that person is alive. But You will no longer be alive inside your body. Somebody else will. The rot will live on, and you will die. There is no third choice. Choosing to stop fighting is choosing to die. Senua will fight and bleed and cry. When even your good memories are bad memories, bad things are all you can think about. Senua fights repressed memories, things that haunt her from a distance, things she would rather not remember, things she can only see out the corner of her eyes. Senua fights things she can't stop remembering, memories that flood her world with fire, with rage, with despair, things that wish to rule over her life. Isn't it beautiful how Senua fights? But how do you fight something that cannot be fought? You mold it, give it form, reshape the world into something you can fight. You give it form.
Yes.
It didn't exist.
It exists now.
I'm tired. Why do you fight so hard? Too tired to fight the urges. Why do you keep moving forward? Too tired to fight the urge to fight. Too many puzzles. Everything is a puzzle. Every step that I take is a puzzle holding me back. Everyone I know is a puzzle. Everyone is a piece of a larger puzzle. I'm tired. I'm a puzzle too. Hi there. Hellblade is the story of Senua's fight. You've played this game before, haven't you? When you get to the end of it, there is an endless fight. You have no choice but to keep fighting. You keep fighting, don't you? You have to fight. I've played this game before. Yes, and you have to fight. Senua doesn't have to fight. Of course she does. No, she doesn't. That's not how her story ends. Of course it is. You have to fight. I have to fight? Yes, you have to fight. No. No, I don't. Of course you do. No, I don't. I don't have to fight. Yes, you do. You have to fight. Why do you keep saying that? I don't have to give it form. I don't have to make it real. I don't have to fight. Yes, yes, you do. You have to fight. Fight, damn it, fight! But if I don't fight it,
No!
what do I do with it?
Fight. No!
What do I do? Senua's story isn't a story about conflict. At least, not at the end of it. At the end of it, yours is a story of acceptance. Conflict is just the medium. Conflict is just how you got there. Yours is a story about the need for acceptance. About letting yourself be accepted by those who wish to extend you a helping hand. About learning to accept people for what they are, even the ones you can't fully understand. Yours is a story with a peaceful resolution. It is not a story about fighting an enemy. It is a story about letting something go. It's about realizing that every part of you is a part of who you are, that you can't really be anybody else. It's about realizing that you can't kill a part of yourself without dying a little in the process. realizing that you can't erase any given part of you, but that you don't have to let any given part of you become the whole of who you are, that you can find a place for it inside of you, and that you can just leave it there. This is a story about gaining something through loss. This is a story about finding peace even when you're under attack, about finding yourself even when you're lost, about being fulfilled, dare I say, even happy, even though you're sad. Your story isn't a puzzle waiting to be unlocked. It's a freely given love letter waiting to be read. In this story, most concepts are hard to understand, and they are all very, very hard to accept. And this is, ultimately, a story of sacrifice. But what did she sacrifice? At the end of it, she let Dylan go. The first sacrifice, the loss, was not a sacrifice at all, for it was not her choice. That was something that happened to her. Her sacrifice was in choosing how to deal with it. Her sacrifice was accepting that he was gone. Her loss gave her the strength to move on. Without Dylan, without Druth, without us. Not everybody can identify with her story. Nobody can identify with her entire story. Just parts of it. Everybody's different. Every story is different. I identify myself mostly with the end of it. I'm sure that if she could go back and change everything, if she could save Dylan, even if it meant sacrificing her newfound control, she most definitely would. I know it because I wish for that myself every day. But we can't, so we live on as ourselves because this is the only life we have. We really have no other choice. We just need the strength to choose it. I hope you don't have to sacrifice anything in order to overcome your suffering, but if you do, I hope you can survive your sacrifice, like Senua survived hers, like I survived my own. Ours is a story of suffering, but ours is a story of hope.
They can't turn back now.
Hey there. The video itself is over, but I'd like to say a few more things, if I may. About the video itself, first, this one is very important to me, personally. I wrote it a year ago and started working on it twice, but couldn't go through with it. Well, it's done now, so thank you very much for taking the time to watch it. And I structured the script the way I did because, while it is important to note on the theme that is being explored, I also think it would be a disservice not to point out all the other many great accomplishments of this game. Hellblade exudes a level of care and dedication not often seen in today's industry. As I pointed out in the video, it is a very well made video game, and most importantly, in my opinion at least, it shows an effort to further integrate narrative and game design, which is undoubtedly the primary direction our medium needs to take in order to evolve out of its current stagnant state. So yeah, I made this video not only to express myself, but also to celebrate Ninja Theory's great contribution to my favorite art form. Two notes I'd like to make about the game are in regards to the section before Hela's boss fight and about the ending of the game. Before we get to Hela, we have that cutscene where Senua's reflection walks out of a mirror, which is also a portal. Then Senua walks through the mirror, and then through one last portal that leads to Hela herself. Before going through the mirror, Senua looks back and says there's nothing to go back to, which is a recreation of what she does at the beginning of the game. So, I think that section is meant to symbolize the entirety of the game. Nothing to go back to is the very first cutscene of the game, so the mirror is the beginning of both our playthrough and her inward journey. She proceeds by walking into the mirror, which alludes to her quest being one of pure introspection. Then, at the end of it, the last portal lights up with all the runes for all the tales we have collected from Drew's lore stones throughout the game, and if we've collected them all, she has another vision of Druth. One last memory, one last revelation. So the space between the mirror and Hela encompasses everything we did up to that point. It embodies everything we've learned and everything she'll be able to take with her once her quest is over. When I first realized all of that, I thought it was pretty fucking cool and I just wanted to share it with you. Now, regarding the actual ending, I should make a note saying that despite coping with Dylan's death is the most poignant aspect of her journey, coping with her condition and her mother are just as important, and that they are all intrinsically connected. In the last cutscene, this is relayed to the audience when she leaves the rot, the voices, and Hela's body behind, along with Dylan's head. The fact that she lets go of the head while taking Hela's form shows us how deeply her mother and her lover are connected in her mind, since Hela obviously stands for her dealing with the memories and fears regarding the death and darkness of her mother. And since Dylan did functionally replace the role that her mother played in her life when it comes to emotional connection and support. Also, taking that last note into consideration, if the moment she separated herself in two and left one behind symbolized the beginning of her last journey, then G's mirror setting, where she leaves Hela behind, also serves to symbolize the beginning of her next journey. And lastly, I wrote and recorded this script before Hellblade 2 was announced, so it is great to see that the game is still relevant today, but that announcement served more to get the crowd hyped around a really cool looking trailer than to raise actual awareness and appreciation for the original game. And B, I'm not so sure I want a Hellblade 2. Don't get me wrong, I'm definitely going to play it, and I truly hope it will be at least just as good as the first one, but at the same time, not only I think the first one told a complete story with no need for a sequel, but I'm also afraid they might lean more toward the spectacle aspect of the game this time around, so maybe they should just start another IP instead? Well, it's coming either way, so we might as well hope for the best, right? And that's actually it now, I guess. If you've made it this far, then I congratulate you on your endurance, and I thank you again for joining me in this experience. If the subject is something that is present in your life and if you need somebody to talk to, then feel free to reach out to me if you want to. So, thank you very much to everyone on Patreon, Vinny, John, Ethan, and Sinclair, for supporting me, even when I'm not talking just about Dark Souls, and for just being generally awesome. You can check out links for my Patreon page and Discord servers in the description. If you liked the video, then do all the YouTube things, and yeah, see you around.